for this tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to make this roller coaster. It's using Spline Control. If you're not familiar with that, I'll be going through how to set that up. But the great thing about Spline Control is it deforms things along a spline, so it means we can change our track design on the fly, kind of as we go. Even in play mode, like with Move Path, we can kind of test different kind of heights of track and things, which is brilliant. So I'll be going through how to create this and set up the car going around the spline here, and I'll also be going through sort of how to bake that animation and bake the mesh down into a usable format for Unity. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first thing we'll need to do in creating our roller coaster is create the spline. So the way we do that is firstly create a null, and I'm going to call that 0 spline. The reason I put a 0 here is it means it's going to be first in the list of all of my objects and bones and what have you, so it's really easy to select when it comes to applying the spline control to those objects. So if we come on to Scene Editor, I'm just going to drag this into view. So I am going to add another null and call that node. I'm just going to parent the node to the spline there just by dragging it under spline, and I'm just going to leave that where it is. So I'm now going to clone that item. And you can see here we've got node 2. I'm just going to move that out by about, I don't know, 20 meters, and I'm also going to give it an item shape. So I'll just come under P for properties, geometry, beg your pardon, geometry, item shape. I'm just going to select the ball from this list here. Okay, and that just makes it easy to select later on. Okay, so now I can clone, Control C. I'm just going to set that up to be, let's just make 5 clones for now. So we've got these in our list here. So I'm just literally going to start moving these around in scene. And these will essentially start to make up our spline. Okay, so we can add nodes later if we want to make a longer track or what have you, but for now that will do us. So I'll just turn off my light and camera. Okay, so for the spline to appear we need something to reference that spline. So what we can do is, if I create another null, we're going to use some bones. So if I just call this null bones, and I can just then come across to setup, bone, child bone, I'm just going to call that bone. There we go. And I'm going to set that to be, press P for properties, sorry. I set the rest length to be 2, and I'm going to make sure I use morph positions here. This is going to come in handy later when dealing with our rails, so we need to set that up now. Okay, so just while we've got one bone, if we come under motion options, let's press M for motion options, we've got spline control there. So we just select our 0 spline there, and straight away you can see that our spline has appeared. So we select our spline now, and you can see that is now giving us a spline, which is great, just what we want. Okay, so with spline selected we can come across to motion options again, controllers and limits, and we can select closed spline, and you can see now that's a a looping kind of track, which is perfect for what we need. So I'm just going to hit Alt D on the PC. Not sure what the Mac shortcut is. That's just to duplicate my null there. I'm going to do the same again just to create a few more. Okay, and that gives us a sort of basic spline there, which is great. Okay, what you need to be aware of is, let's see if we can pick out a twist in the track, because we've literally just moved these nulls around, and at the moment we've got no rotation on these nodes here, and you can see here there's a bit of a twist in the track. It kind of flips over, and that's basically because the nodes aren't orientated along the spline. So we've just got to do a bit of housekeeping, and let's just make sure that if I just come into rotate mode, just make sure that heading arrow is pointing along the spline. So I'm just going to go through now, and you'll see as I'm doing this, you'll see the twisting kind of moving along away from us. If we don't do this, when things travel along the spline, they'll flip when they get to those twists. So it's just kind of eradicating that. So now we've got a nice clean spline. So I'll just save that. Okay, so at this point you could potentially start to design your roller coaster track, really. You don't have to have your track rails in there and the cars and things like that, so we can, you know, just play around with some simple designs. So that's the spline setup, and if we just take our bone, which is set to spline control, you can see that if I move that along in Z now, just drag in here, that will follow the spline, because in motion options we set the spline control to be our spline null. Okay, so that's perfect. So what we're going to do now is make a bone chain which is going to follow the length of our track. So the way I do this is to previously anyway, the way I do it is hit the equals key about 200 times to create a massive long chain of bones, which isn't great for anyone to watch or fun for me to do. So at this point I'd give a massive shout out to the LightWave community and Ryan Roy in particular, and he came to my aid and created this tiny plugin for me. Really simple for him to do, but it saved me a ton of repetitive strain injury. I can now just select 200 bones here and hit enter, and that will now create a massive long chain of bones, which is perfect. So I can select all of those, hit motion options and select spline, and you can see now that they're all deforming nicely along the spline. So I'm just going to hit bone active on that. You can see I've got some doubling up on there. Looks like I've maybe got some tripling up as well, so we could probably go in and maybe delete some of these bones, but we'll see. Let's have a look. You can see there that I've deleted too many, so let's just use the tool again. I'm just going to put 50 in here, select all those bones, motion options, spline control and bone active. Okay, perfect. So the idea here now is going to be we're going to get a mesh and we're going to use those bones to deform it along that spline. So I'll see you in part 3. Hey, so welcome to part 3 of the tutorial. So I'm just going to now show you the meshes we're going to use to create our track. So this is pretty much as simple as it gets. We've got 3 rails, and what we're going to do, we're going to extend those along our spline. So the first thing we need to do after we've created our rails, we need to create a morph. So you come down here to M and select new, we'll just call that morph and hit create. So I'm just going to select these points, and I'm going to hit V for value, and I'm going to set them to 400 meters in Z. So that makes them nice and long, and that'll let us deform this morphed mesh along our spline. Okay, so I'm just going to return that back to the base, and we're going to need some subdivisions here. So if we come along to multiply, down to subdivide and more, we've got Julienne 2. I'm just going to select Z, and let's put 200 divisions in there, hit enter, and now you can see that's got loads of detail in there. Okay, it's probably a good point now to UV map these or texture these, so then later when we come to bake the mesh down, you've already got a UV map applied, but I'll let you do that at your own pace. Okay, so let's just send this to layout. I've got a few other bits in here that I'll just hide for now. We've got some supports and a stand and the cars as well. Talk about those in a bit. Okay, so we've got our rails object, and so what we're going to do is just hit P for properties. So I'm going to set subdivision order to last. Okay, and that means it will deform nicely, and because it's got no bones, we need to get it to use the bones from our bones null. So if I select bones, hit properties, I can use bones from the bones null. Okay, so now when I come across to the deform tab and hit morph mixer, let's set our slider range from 0 to 100. So this is kind of cool. When you start to slide, you get a nice deformation along the bones. Could be quite cool for animated motion graphics or something as well, this technique. But for us, we just want to come in and line that up. So I'm just hitting the envelope button, and I'm going to come in here and zoom in. Then I can just click and drag and kind of eyeball that just so it closes the gap in the track here. So there we go, we've got a nice base of a track here. It's a very short track, so what we can do if we want is just come to the top down view. If I select our very last node, which is node 9, just duplicate that. I'm just going to do that a few times. You can see how that's just extending the spline there. So if I just select these, I'm just going to move these down. And so on. Okay. So you can see our bones have actually only reached this point. So when we come to extend our rails, select that and get our morph mixer up again. We'll start to extend that. After it's hit the end of the bone chain, it starts to tail off. So we need some more bones. So if I just select that last bone and come across to our special script again, I'm just going to add another 30 bones. I'm just going to select all of those, and for motion options, select our spline. This is why we put this 0 on our spline, because it's always at the top of the list. It makes life so much easier. We'll hit P for properties, bone active. You'll see there that track springing into life now. Still need a few more, so we're just going to add some child bones. We'll have a bit of overlap, but let's add 20 more. Select those bones. And we're going to make sure they're set to spline and they're active. Okay, so now we can come to our morph again and kind of close that gap. You can see here we're getting some twisting, and that's because we've not aligned our nodes to the actual spline. So I'm just going to focus in on those and make sure our heading is looking down the spline there. Let's do the same for both of these. There we go, let's fix that. Okay, so we can kind of manipulate this track to be more interesting, and that's starting to look pretty cool. Okay, so again, I'm just going to close that gap. So next, it'd be nice if we had some kind of supports along this track. So if I just select my supports, you'll see here I've hidden this at the moment. You'll see I've made one support which fits the 3 rails there, which is kind of nice. So what we're going to do is we're going to select our spline, P for properties, click the instancer tab and add instance generator. So I'm just going to double click that, and I'm going to add our supports. I'm going to make them textured shaded solid, and I'm going to come across to under the type, I'm going to set that to spline, and you click the distribute button. So however many instances we have, it's going to distribute them along the length of that entire spline. So as I start to increase this value now, you kind of get 120 in there. That looks kind of nice. So we get those deforming with our spline, which is really kind of neat. Alright, so next I'm going to add another instance generator. I'm going to select my spline again, and I'm going to add another instance generator, and this one, let's select the first and just put supports, and this one is going to be stands. Okay, and I'm going to add a track stand here. This is just a vertical stand. It's going to help us sort of ground the track when we come to bake it all down. Okay, so we've got our stand, and again I'm going to select spline, distribute, and let's just put 30 in that. 60 is too many. Okay, so that looks a bit funky at the minute, so what I'm going to do is just come under rotation, under alignment I'm going to set that to none, and that's giving us a kind of uniform kind of stand, which kind of works. So what we're going to do later is bake this down to a full mesh, and then we'll align all the points of these stands to the floor plane, so it kind of works. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the coaster now. So I'll see you in part 4 for setting up the car. Okay, so here we have my coaster cars. So I've kind of made sure that the wheels fit around my top 2 rails there. I don't think I'll get any awards for modelling here, but hopefully it gets the idea across. So I've made 5 duplicates of my car, and then I've created a weight map for each car. So these are going to be controlled by bones. So I would come to weight shade. You'll see that each of these has its own weight map. I'm not sure how to do that. If you can select new, so this is weight map 6, so I can select any points or polys, come to map, and I can set a value for those. So that's pretty much it. So then when we send these over to layout, which we've already done, let's just grab the scene editor and find our train. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm actually just going to hide all these bones because we don't really need to see those at the moment. Let's just select all bones of current item, and then I'm just going to use my visibility tools and hide selected. Okay, that makes things a bit easier. Okay, so I'm going to come to my train, and what I want to do is create a bone. So it's going to be bone 1, and I'm going to make that how long is it going to be? 3 meters. Okay, and then I'm just going to come across and give each car a bone, and I'm going to give each car bone its weight map. So that's bone 1, bone 2, bone 3, bone 4, and bone 5. Select all of those and hit bone active, and then we just hit motion options, select our spline, and if we select the very last bone, or the very first one, bone 1, and change its Z value, we get animation along the spline. So I'm just going to set this to be 0 and probably hide the rest of those bones, to be honest, so we don't need those anymore. Okay, so let's give this 300 frames, and sorry, 0 frame for 300. Let's try 200 meters, and just come in top down view. We basically, if we want this to loop, we're looking to align the base of that bone with the origin there. You can see there's a blue dot. Let's try and eyeball that, so that when we play this through, you'll see the train should just go over that loop nicely. So obviously if you're animating this, you probably wouldn't want to just do 2 keyframes. You'd want to get the train to kind of speed up as it went down the slopes and things like that to make it more dynamic. But for this, I think 2 keyframes will do. So that's pretty much it for the animation. What I didn't mention before is we can kind of tweak these nodes on the rail, excuse me. And if we tweak the bank, we can get some really nice kind of effects in these corners. You know, you could potentially create loops. So we've got some kind of nice, interesting that's kind of cool. It's the beauty of this, you know, you're not really stuck to any kind of design. If you want a bigger coaster, you duplicate a node, extend the bone chain and extend the morph, and everything will follow. It's a really cool kind of system, and this will work for a lot of different kind of track related things. I've done race tracks where you can kind of get, you know, cones or trees and things like that following alongside the road while you get cars animating along the spline. So I think we're about there with the design of our coaster. So let's check out part 5 where we'll bake some stuff down. Okay, so this section is really about optimizing the roller coaster, because if I wanted to get this into a game engine, I doubt that Unity or whatever would read this, because it's full of instances. It's got the spline, we've got way too many bones, and we've not baked any animation from the spline, so it'd probably be a bit of a mess if we tried to do that. So what I'm going to do is a few steps to get this into a baked usable state. So first thing I'm going to do is let's assume that this is our, you know, final roller coaster. We're really happy with the design, and so we're going to bake this down now into its final format. So what we're going to do is select our rails, and we're just going to go save trans object. So I'm going to save that as trans rails. Okay, and now I can just remove rails from the scene. Okay, so just to show you that that's worked, I've now loaded that trans rails in, and you can see that's one baked mesh now. So we're not using any deformations on that at all now, so that's good. Let's just delete that out. We also want to, let's save this out. Let's save this as coaster stripped. Okay, so I'm just going to remove everything I don't need at the moment. So I'm going to take out the bones, I think. So yeah, that's removed all the bones from the scene. I'm going to remove, for now, I'm going to remove the train. So all we've got really is our spline and our stands and supports. So what we're going to do is come across to MG bake instances. So if you go on the NewTek website, a LightWave 3D plugin database, do a search for bake instances, you'll be able to find it on there. So this will essentially just bake selected instances. So I've got my spline selected, run the tool, and you can see here it's going through all of those, and it's going to create an object for each of those things now. Let it run its course. Okay, so we've now got all of these are real objects. So I'm just going to delete our original versions. I'm going to select our nodes. I'm going to delete all of those. So now we're essentially left with all our meshes. So these are all in bounding box at the minute. So this is great, but we've got hundreds of meshes, which isn't going to go very well in any kind of game engine. So the trick is basically exporting an FBX, load it into Modeler, and you've got an option to load it as one layer. So that will merge all of our objects into one. So essentially while we saved the scene and stripped everything out, we're just kind of going to export an FBX of this. Models, materials, and we'll just call that supports, trans supports, just so we know. Okay, that's it. So we come across to Modeler, Control O to open, and we've got trans supports here. So here's the option to load each object into a separate layer. We'll leave that unchecked, hit continue, and now we've got our kind of baked mesh really. So what we can do is, if you so wish, you can select all the points on the base of your stands. Just spend a bit more time than I am, but you can obviously just go in and align all those, so you can kind of set them all on the floor or whatever you're going to do. Okay, that'll do for now. There's a couple left over, but so we'll save this in our objects, trans supports, lovely, and we'll come back to layout. I'm just going to clear that scene. We don't need any of that stuff anymore. So if I load our recent scene, which is going to crash layout, thank you. Let's try again. Load our recent scene, which is coaster stripped. We can now we select all the bones of current item on our train. Let's do that, and then we're going to bake the motion. So if we come across to, I think I've got it, RH MF Motion Baker, that's Mental Fish. You can grab it from the Mental Fish website, or you can again find it on the LightWave 3D plugin database. So search for Motion Baker, you'll find that on there. So I'm just going to select the range for baking. I'm going to select, leave it as is. That's going to bake position, rotation and scale. Let it do its thing. There we go. So we now have keyframes for all of our rotations. Okay, so now we can, if we hit motion options, we can turn off the spline now, and so we've got no reference to that. So in the scene editor, I can now just remove that spline totally, and I'm going to remove supports, stand, bones. So right now all we've got is our train going round, okay, which is all lovely. So now I'm just going to load in trans rails, trans supports, and probably good for good measure I'll create a null. Let's call it coaster, and I'm going to parent everything to that. So we've got kind of a nice clean hierarchy for exporting. So now we've got no spline control, no deformation as such. It's just a few bones with a baked animation, and that, as they say, is that. Thanks for watching.